welcome back to Cinematic Sarcastic, podcast that talks all things movies and television. I'm Natalie, and I'm your host. On today's episode, we're going to talk about The Watchers. This is the new film starring Dakota Fanning. It is the directorial debut of Ishana Shyamalan, who is M. Night Shyamalan's daughter. Now, I will say, right out of the gate, I was a little hesitant about this film. And I will say it is just because I have not been that entertained or that interested in one of M. Night Shyamalan's films, with exception of maybe one or two, probably in the last decade. Like, I really loved and enjoyed his earlier films, the ones that he did that were obviously his own ideas, and I think those were incredible. And then kind of once his career kept going, it was just sort of dud after dud after dud for me. Again, with some exceptions, I really enjoyed Split, but for the most part, I would say the majority of his films I haven't really liked. So when I heard that his daughter was coming out to be a director, kind of in the back of my mind, I was like, ooh, I hope she kind of has her own unique taste, has her own feel to filmmaking, and that she doesn't really like walk the same path. Like I'm hoping she can get out from underneath her dad's shadow and kind of distinctly do her own thing. And I think that The Watchers was the worst possible debut film for her to have done that with, because this really, if you were to take Ishana Shyamalan's name off of The Watchers and put M. Night Shyamalan's name on it, no difference. I would not in any way, shape, or form know that this was not an M. Night Shyamalan film. And that kind of makes sense. You know, he is a producer on this film. So I imagine he probably helped her, you know, behind the scenes as far as picking the story that she wanted to do. I am sure he was on set with her, like helping her with direction. And this really just sort of screams one of M. Night Shyamalan's like duds. And that's unfortunate because it isn't his film. It is his daughter's film. But I don't think anything about this stood out as uniquely her own. It really just feels like something that her dad would have directed and would have done, and that I probably would have passed on watching if it was his film, or I certainly would not have put this in one of the movies that I thought was like his best work. So for anyone who is not familiar with The Watchers, this does star Dakota Fanning. Like I said, it follows her character of Mina. You really are pretty much following her throughout the whole entire thing. It takes place in Ireland. Her character is an American who is just living there, I guess. You never really learn that much about her. She is tasked with taking a parrot, like some sort of really rare parrot, across Ireland to a zoo. And somewhere in the middle of that journey, she winds up in this Irish forest. Her car breaks down. She finds herself lost in the woods, meets up with a woman named Madeline, and is taken to this bunker where essentially the whole rest of the film is her and three other characters that are essentially trapped in this bunker because you can only move around during the daylight. As soon as the sun goes down, there are these mysterious unknown creatures that will attack and essentially, I guess, kill you. Now, I really think that this just, perhaps because it was based on, like, the story is taken from a book of the same name, I really sort of feel like the book probably is where this should have stayed. I think a lot of the elements of this probably work better on the page than they do in film, and or it just was not translated well or not executed well for this to be particularly entertaining. It is sort of a slower film. There are, you know, jump scares and sort of more intense moments, but because there aren't a lot of people in this film, like you're really following four characters, you don't really get to know any of them particularly well. They are very one-dimensional, like very flat characters. And so the jump scares really are kind of just like waking you up as you're watching the film. It's like, oh, that's right, I'm watching something that's supposed to be scary. Like the majority of it is just them sort of walking around in the daylight talking about these creatures. that none of them have ever seen and none of them have ever, really had that many encounters with. I think one lady, I think Madeline has seen them or had some sort of moment with them, but you don't really see that on film. It's just sort of mentioned. Once the reveal happens in this movie, I feel like it's all downhill from there. It sort of has one of those false endings, and then 30 or so minutes later is the true ending of the film. And I know that if they had ended it at that false ending, it would have been a very short film. It would have been, probably an hour long. But I genuinely wish that they had written it differently to cut out sort of that last little bit, maybe add in some other things, add in some more moments where we get to see, the creatures that are revealed to us, because the last 30 minutes, I feel like not only didn't really add anything in particular that I felt was necessary for the story, but it really just sort of served to make me dislike the rest of it more, because I was ready to go by then. I was not connected to this film. I was not connected to any of the characters. There are a few moments in this where, there are sort of intense moments that happened with these characters, and I just did not care. You don't get to know them well enough to have that sort of emotional connection to them or to care what happens to them. Every single one of these characters could have not made it through this film, and I would have walked out feeling exactly the same. I wouldn't have been bummed. I wouldn't have been, interested in why that had happened. I feel like there were a lot of moments in this movie that didn't make sense or left me with more questions than gave me answers. There is a brief sort of explanation as to why these things are out there, but it doesn't really go into detail, and you don't really get to learn that much about why they are, what their motivations are for attacking people or going after people. And you don't really ever get to know why did she have this parrot? Also, why did they not eat this parrot? And I know that sounds horrible, but when you get into the story, they're trapped out there for months and months, and they're eating, crows and things that they find in the woods. But for some reason, this parrot, they just never touch this parrot. It just lives the entire way through the movie, which to me doesn't make sense in terms of what their situation is. You're not going to keep one animal alive if you are struggling to find food elsewhere, just the logistics of it don't make sense. And then it never really explains kind of how the world is normal outside of this area, because it's it's every day, right? Outside of this area of the woods. But then it's sort of magical or different inside this particular area. And it never explains how no one knows that or how hundreds upon hundreds of people that are traveling through the Irish countryside don't get trapped there and killed, and that doesn't raise alarms for anyone at any point. There are just a lot of parts that I think that just did not translate well, that you might be more forgiving in a book that you're not necessarily forgiving of in the film. I think this one right now on Rotten Tomatoes is standing at a 29% critic score and a 58% audience score. And I would say that's probably about right. I don't think that this is one that is worth going to the theaters and paying that much money to see. I think if you are even remotely interested in it, watching it when it comes out on streaming is fine. This is one that I don't think has made enough of an impact on me that I would even bother to watch it again. It was just kind of a dud all the way around. And that sucks for the fact that it is her first film. And it probably is one of those things where I'm well, I'm not really going to be looking for Ishana Shyamalan movies going forward, because this one didn't really particularly wow me. So why would I look out or be excited about any of the films that she does going forward? I hope that she can break out of it. It would be nice to have some more films that are original and really interesting and cool, the way that M. Night Shyamalan did his at the beginning of his career. But so far, I'm not really seeing that from Ishana Shyamalan, unfortunately. So those are my thoughts on The Watchers. I would love to know what you guys thought of this one if you have seen it. Subscribe to join the Movie Nerd family, and I hope to to see you in the next episode.